that Kaz should have an opportunity to really say a few words about it.
Yeah. Bravo.
Well, I could probably talk about it for hours.
Good. Good.
We'll try to spare you from that. I guess I'm not really sure exactly what to say. Joseph was saying, talking a little bit about the history of where these ideas came from, and
Talk about your work. Talk about your work.
talk about the work.
Your work, yes.
Okay.
Talk about your work.
Well, I was going to talk about a little bit about mathematical poetry in general, but please do.
Do that.
Talk about your work.
This particular piece.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, this particular piece is 12 mathematical poems that are all mapped contiguously in a three-dimensional space and mapped on a Cartesian coordinate system. But if you remember from algebra, the X and Y graphing that you did, you had like a number line. You remember in grade school you had a number line. It went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on one side and negative 1, 2, 3, 4. So that idea is basically mapped onto an axis between two words floating in space. So you have the words like emptiness and thinking, which is mapped in space. And you have gradations, just like the number line between these concepts on an axis. And then we have three axes, so that's one axis, and another axis is existence and non-existence, and then gradations along that axis, and then the third axis, monasticism and urbanity, and gradations along that axis. So the entire space, every point in the space has meanings relative to all of those concepts. So if you move a point over and pick a point out in space that's closer to emptiness and monasticism and existence, then it has value of the three concepts in space. So you have every point in that space has a different value based on those concepts. Now, at the axes, which are the green balls, at the ends of the axes is where the concepts lie. And so if you multiply one of the green balls times another green ball, you get a red ball, and that's where the poem lies. So the poem is a multiplication. That's one. Each red ball, there's 12 red balls. Each one of those represents the point in space where the poems lie, and it's a multiplication of the concepts of like thinking and non-existence. You get one word, and then those equations, thinking times non-existence equals onkival, or these words actually, since there is no word in the English language that represents thinking times non-existence, I just fabricated one. So that word, it represents what those are, what those concepts are. So each of the 12 poems have different fabricated words. And if you look at some of the words, you can kind of pick out some of the some of the words in it. Like one of them is like dream hole, and it's spelled D-R-E-E-M, like reaming a hole, but it mentions dream. Also, whole and value. So all of them have val on the end of them because we're talking about a value. And so each of the words you can kind of pick apart and use your own poetic intuition, because most of the ones I do know, a lot of you that are poets and have poetic insight into words and constructions of words. And so that's where the metaphors are mapped across that way. I mean, cognitive scientists talk about metaphors being source is target is source. So I think I'm going to get off. I don't want to get off again. I'm thinking, but stay with the piece. Stay with the piece. I can start talking about all so I guess basically in a nutshell, that's what the piece is. So if you have any questions, you know, of course I'd be glad to talk about it. And,
Well, you mentioned Zen Buddhism, okay, and as a source for some of your
that's
ideas.
right. Those concepts are all the three jewels of Zen Buddhism. And they're basically taking the three jewels of Zen Buddhism, which is Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, and turning them into antonyms. And out of curiosity, I went ahead and bounced this off of a Zen master friend of mine. And he pretty much bought into everything except for one, and I changed one of them and used his suggestion for vanity was basically his idea. And I'm pleased with his idea. I think it works much better than what I had before.
So it sounds like a lamination between Zen Buddhism, Hegelian thesis, the syllogisms of Hegel, right? We can call it Hegelian. But we can also talk about James Joyce as also a magician of words, the way you are in three-dimensional space. If James Joyce was alive right now, I think that you guys should shake hands. Listen, there's just one thing that I have to mention. In 1979, Kaz Maslanka was my first student out at Wichita State University when I was a young assistant professor.
Any questions or anything?
Sure. I just had a question. In terms of what came first, the poem or visualizing a three-dimensional space, or?
The idea came from when I was working years ago, basically as a security guard on the night shift, and had nothing to do with read. And it was a great gig because I could just read all night and think. And I was studying algebra, and when I first got into it, actually I was terrible in algebra in high school. I basically flunked it. I said, what's this crap for? I'm not going to use it. I'm an artist. You know, I'll never use math. And it wasn't until I was finishing up my BFA in sculpture that I read a book on quantum mechanics and Einstein's theories of relativity. It was not math-based, but it was so inspiring. I said, oh my God, I've got to take physics. And I've got to learn math. It's like, oh no. But I switched over and I got my attitude together and jumped into it, and it was great. It just like started clicking, but it was just an attitude.
What was the title of the book?
The Dancing Wooly Masters by Gary Zukav. And it's very similar to the Tao of Physics, and Fred Allen Wolf had another book about physics. And it's kind of like this pop. It was in the 1979. There was a bunch.
Yeah, it was like a bestseller.
Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance.
Yeah, Fritz yeah. And there was this kind of a movement of thinking, and when I was kind of plugged into it, and then I started studying algebra, and I started looking at the equations and seeing that these variables, heck, you can put anything in them. I mean, you don't have to put numbers. You can put pictures in them. You can put any kind of idea. I mean, this equals that, plus that. Why not? I mean, it just felt poetic, you know. It just felt like this is the way. And then, you know, Robert turned me on to Bernard Venet, and Venet was basically taking math equations, just pure math equations, and calling them art. You know, he just, and I thought at the time I thought that's real cool. You know, because he was kind of pointing at the aesthetics of math, and you know, and then once you get into math, then you start seeing that there is a certain set of aesthetics there that's totally different than the art aesthetics. Although there's lots of confusion and debate about the two, and where the borders are. But so I started seeing that I could use math as a language for poetics, and so that was in around 1981, somewhere around there. And so I started, you know, doing things